Hello, I'm Evan Day, young adult librarian at Rogers Public Library. Some of you may remember our Dungeons & Dragons character creation video. I worked with a friend named Brian to create a Dungeons & Dragons character, something I had never done before as sort of a tutorial. Now, later we wanted to take that character I created and do an actual session with them to show how you might actually, like someone like myself who has not played Dungeons & Dragons, could actually learn how to play. Unfortunately, the audio for that session that we recorded did not record. So we did an interview later where we talked about that session and sort of explained again all the steps that go into playing Dungeons & Dragons for the first time. And unfortunately, the video for that did not record. I did, however, record all the audio. It's not the best quality, and Brian was nice enough to share the maps he made for that encounter as well. So this is about a 30-minute long interview with Brain Dallman, with me, a guy who's only played Dungeons & Dragons once in his life, learning about the experience of playing the game for the first time. So hope you'll enjoy that. Hope it's informative or at least somewhat enjoyable for you. Apologies that we couldn't do more, but I wanted to give you something. So here it is. Hello, everyone. This is Evan Day, young adult librarian at Rogers Public Library, along with my friend Brian here. We're here again to talk to you about D&D. Now, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Last time you may have seen us, we were creating a character, a Dragonborn fighter named Zorlin. And it was fun. I created it. And last time we talked about we were going to do a session here. We did that session, actually. It was a lot of fun. It was epic. There was lightning and dragons and all sorts of craziness. It was amazing. And we did it, and the audio didn't record completely, and it was unusable. So what we're going to do...
Missed a good one.
Yes, it was a good one. Now, what we're going to do here instead is we're going to walk through, using that session that happened as sort of a guide, we're going to walk through what a typical, especially introductory D&D session might look like, a solo campaign like this. And so we're just going to talk about the basics, and maybe we'll give some tips about how to, as a player or as a DM, you can have a good time playing Dungeons & Dragons or any tabletop game, I suppose. First up, Ryan, the first thing we did was you sort of set the stage, as I recall.
Yes, in fact, I actually have all the map and stuff here.
Oh, nice.
We started out in a small town that I made up that doesn't actually exist in any way, shape, or form. And it was just like a small mountainside village surrounded by forest for the most part, with the mountain looming in the background. And then, to take that a step further, I even added a reason why you might have been there to begin with, which was the ferns that you were sent to collect originally that have mysterious antibody properties that are very good for very dangerous types of poisons and such.
Yeah, and that's really good that you would give somebody a motivation to do so. I suppose if you wanted to, you could say, and I hadn't really provided a backstory or built something for my character, but if it maybe tied into that person's sort of story or moving along, maybe if this character was searching for their family or something like that, maybe that would be a motivation. But as I recall, what happened is that I came across some people there, and Zorlin... turned out there was something going on in the town that they were...
Yeah, so the rule of hospitality, one of the families opened up their homes. And to go a step further beyond that, they also had an ulterior motive where they were having a problem with things going missing in the village. The whole village was. And so they were wanting to, get you into a position where they could ask you for help and, give you a place to stay so that it wouldn't feel like it was too much of a bother on you.
I don't know if I ever...
Go.
No, I was just saying, I don't know if I ever caught on that was actually a motivation on their part. I think he just sort of they just happened to ask me for help there, so...
Well, they certainly weren't expecting you to show up.
Oh, no, that's true. And of course, I agreed to being the nice. I was trying to stay in alignment, stay in character. I tried to say yes. I'll help you out there. I'll follow. I'll help guard and do what I can. Answering the call to adventure, but also staying, in character for what this guy was trying to do. And as I recall, the guy is sitting there and he hears something or sees something.
I don't remember which happened first. I think you heard the muttering first.
Yes.
The language that you didn't understand. So you were peeking out the window and you saw three shorter creatures meandering through the village.
Yes.
And that was when you decided to take the action.
I straight up followed them. I guess I should mention this was something we sort of talked about. Mentally as this is happening, there is a part of me that's thinking, well, obviously this is a character. I should probably follow this clear opportunity. But as a DM, you kind of have to be prepared in case the player doesn't follow your...
So I'm going to let you know something. The general response I thought would happen was, okay, I'm going to stealth. I'm going to hang behind them a bit. I'm going to sort of follow them, let them lead me to their lair and things like that. The response I got was absolutely better.
Oh, yes.
This man is like, no, I'm going to settle this right here, right now. He walks out proud.
Exactly.
He goes, hey, you, what are you doing here?
That's true. In my mind, the character was not. That is true. I did not stealthily follow. I actually straight into the point. And I don't know why I thought this. Maybe my thought was, well, this isn't really a stealthy character. He's a big giant dragon T-Rex person. And I thought, I just looked at my sheet and I saw, well, he has an intimidation proficiency. Maybe I can do that first. He wasn't necessarily trying to start a fight, but maybe get the answers there. But yes, and that was a lot of fun. That's actually a good example of things happening differently. But when that did happen, the goblins sort of, I believe, ran pretty much.
Yeah, they bolted. They're like, oh my gosh, who's that?
Yes.
That wasn't part of the plan. They ran into the woods.
Yes,
You
and
were able to keep up.
and I was able to keep up.
One of the things, actually, if you can see it on the map, yeah, right there.
Yeah.
So while you were running through the woods, there was a small chance that a boar was actually going to show up out of the woods and possibly cause you trouble.
Oh, well, that's interesting. So,
Yeah.
I guess that's one aspect about this that you kind of have to remember, and it makes a game like Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop games is because you have sort of this random element that
Yeah.
these things could happen, that the thing could go, but it's not always going to happen in exactly a linear fashion.
Yeah, so there are always two unknowns.
Mhm.
On the player side, it's the unknown of what the GM has set up. And on the GM side, it's the unknown of the players being able to do pretty much whatever they want. You can have some idea of a possible situation that the players take, but you're never going to know for sure.
Right. Very good. And once I got there, Zorlin, the Dragonborn guy, he saw the cave that they had actually come to, and I'm writing down notes for myself, taking in all the characters and sort of mapping out as well as I can. And at that point, I guess it's interesting to me. The thing that makes it interesting to me is the freedom the characters theoretically have to make a decision. I could, and I actually thought about this for a second, from a realistic standpoint, could have thought, perhaps the wise thing might be to go back and get help. But I didn't do that. I thought I didn't want these guys to run, and maybe I was wanting to just, I don't want to necessarily say treat it like a video game, but think I should be the one to try to address this and go in there. And how did I was able to, it wasn't locked or anything? There wasn't any problem getting into the cave, I don't believe?
No, so the biggest thing is, because you didn't have the boar fight, you were actually able to keep up with them the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
So you actually saw them sort of just move into the mountain. which gave you the opportunity to like check the wall and see that there was a cave there, but it was like hidden. It was sort of like an illusion of where the entrance was set that you couldn't actually see it looking straight on.
Yes.
So, funny thing is, you hadn't kept up with it. If the boar had shown up and you had dealt with that, we would have had to have you make a perception check. You would have had to like sort of stumble around, maybe checking the ground for goblin tracks or checking the face wall to see if there was anything amiss, something like that.
And that does actually lead to some of the more interesting parts of it to me. Is, there are certain things where like, okay, the player can just do this, but right. Sometimes even the simplest tasks you might have to roll for, and then you never know, that person might do something spectacularly well, or they might completely fail, and that can lead to a lot of humor if a person tries to throw somebody a weapon in combat, I suppose, and rolls a failure and the thing flies into nothingness. I was watching a podcast where I was listening to a podcast where that kind of happened, where a player tried to do that. And
an example of that in this game, in fact, but that's spoilers.
Oh, that is spoilers. Yes, I forgot about that. Yeah. And so that can lead to a lot of humor and a lot of fun and a lot of dramatic moments, although probably, I'm guessing, a lot of frustration at times as well.
The bigger picture, at least when I try to GM, is that I always like to try and instill at least some sort of tension or mystery, right? So, like, if you would have had that boar interrupt you, like, all of a sudden now, where did they go? Maybe you see their tracks, and you're like, okay, the tracks, you saw the foliage stomped out, but as you got closer to the mountain, there's not as much, so now where did they go? They obviously went this direction, they headed straight for the mountain. There's something here, but I can't see it right away. Now it's like, what could possibly be here that I don't know about? Things like that.
Yeah, and that was really cool. But of course, I got past the boar, and I was able to find it, or Zerlin was, and he entered in, and at that point, we're getting, you enter in, the goblins are there, and I guess
there's actually something else before that.
Oh, there was,
that winding cave that led up to the door where the goblins were.
Oh, okay.
I had you roll a perception check because there were 2 traps in there.
Oh.
And if you had not noticed them, when they triggered, all they did was they dropped rotten meat that the goblins hadn't actually gotten to eating on top of you, and it would have made you sick. It would have sickened you, which would have made it harder for you to actually perform tasks later on in the adventure.
Oh, yes, interesting. I'd forgotten.
Did you notice when you were able to avoid it?
Yeah, I noticed. I had forgotten about that aspect, and that's another thing. And of course, having a different character, like a character with a higher perception check. My guy has a pretty good perception check, but probably affects that. And so it's just thinking, okay, it's not all about just having a big character that can swing a sword and smash things. He has to be able to see other stuff.
That's one of the things. Like, a lot of people look at it and they're like, oh, it's like a video game and this and that and that. And no. It is an experience because you have way more freedom and there's way more possibility for way more stuff. Video games are very limited by the code that's written. You have very specific things you can do. But in an RPG, I have had plenty of games that I've run where suddenly the whole campaign's something else because the characters found a side quest and then they decided that something in that side quest was way more important than it actually was. That actually is
a very interesting aspect to me, and also something that I think could, if the DM wasn't prepared, could run into some problems or something like that. To find the freedom players could have to just not follow what you expect them to do. That's the most interesting aspect. And we had a few cases of that, certainly already, and then later on. Not too many. I was mostly straightforward, I think. Though I did a few.
Yeah, I tried not to add too much.
No. I mean, I could have come to think of it, there was a lot of things I could have if I'd really. And I do get the feeling that if somebody wanted to be just a pain, they could really, or if they were just wanting to do things differently for the sake of being differently, they could try different things, and I think that could be fun. But as long as everybody else in the group isn't being
Right. So it's a team effort.
Right.
If you're going to be playing in the game, don't be an antagonist for the sake of being antagonist. You can be evil
Yes.
without being a jerk.
Right, exactly. Don't just randomly attack the storekeep because you want
Yes.
to. Not without a good reason, I suppose. And then I didn't. The Zorlin, he did not fall into the trap. He did see a couple of goblins there who were quite panicking to be followed by this big, giant, scaly person. Yes.
Indeed.
And I know I can say that, and I might be skipping ahead a little bit, but when I encountered them, I did, at least I think what I did, rather than just immediately start swinging, as I did before, went for another intimidation check.
Yeah,
Yes.
you tried to pacify them.
Yes. And that was just...
Unfortunately, it was a bit of a language barrier.
Yes, exactly. But that is actually, I should mention, that's actually another thing where, depending on your character, and probably not too many characters start off speaking Goblin, but that would be something that if your character could speak the language, and it might depend on your race, your proficiency, your background, that might give you a different advantage in that situation. And so it's a little bit something else that changes the game depending on what that character has.
I
And
should also point out just a little bit that this hidden cave actually turned out to be dwarven in nature.
oh yes, that's right.
Because when you got to the end of that tunnel, that winding cave area, it was cave. There were some fungus growing out of the sides. It was sort of slick and slimy as caves can get due to the humidity. But once you got to the end of that, there was a legitimate stone door carved into the mountain.
Oh yeah.
Dwarven architecture on it.
And I should probably mention, yes, I'm glad you mentioned that because I did notice, first of it indicates that this is a cave that these goblins have sort of taken for themselves. There's probably some larger history that I didn't know about, and I don't think was necessarily explained upon. Maybe there's a big, giant backstory.
There is, I will let you know right now, there was one thing that you missed.
Oh.
That would have actually expanded upon that.
Oh, okay. Would explain why there was a big dwarven cave, perhaps. And I don't know. Zorlin, it's kind of interesting from a role playing perspective, or whether Zorlin would necessarily be, this Dragonborn fighter character would necessarily be. Maybe some characters would be more interested in that, or maybe they have a higher proficiency, or maybe. I don't, is that a thing where you would actually like if I had looked at the statues and said, would I like looking at my sheet here? Would I like have been able to say like roll for history or something like that, and say?
You might have been able to tell the era, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't have exactly been able to tell what this specific area was necessarily used for because
okay.
you're not a dwarf,
Right.
and there probably aren't many dwarves that remember what this area was used for, anyways. 'Cause
Okay.
It hasn't been used in a while.
Oh, okay.
Maybe part of the dwarven royal family, but not any common dwarf.
Good. That was just a thought I had, and yeah, so that is interesting that there was something there that, and I still had fun that I missed because I was just playing the game and wasn't thinking. I noticed it. I noticed and I thought, oh, this is interesting, but I didn't like. I was focused on the goblins, I suppose.
Right, you had a goal.
Yes, very single-minded, I suppose. Maybe that's in character. And maybe that's sort of like if you had a larger party, you had like one character that's more of a intellectual, and maybe another character wants to blaze through everything.
Yeah, or if you have like a party that's of more experienced players, they're like, oh yeah, I've dealt with dwarves for years of role playing and things like that. So, what can this be? Things like that. There's also that context and perspective that as a first time player you might not have necessarily had.
Good, yeah. And I think once there, we did end up having a fight. The goblins did attack, and I think that's when we finally got into. Not that it was taking too long. I actually kind of delayed it a little bit myself because I wanted to try to.
Right.
Because he's a nice guy, I guess, in many regards. Despite being a fighter that likes to slice things, he doesn't want to like necessarily just slay these goblins that are, not too intimidating looking at first.
They're like half your size.
Yeah, so that would seem kind of mean. So he tries to intimidate them, and it was interesting. I didn't know if this was true that you could when fighting, and he has a long sword and everything, that he could actually go for a non-killing blow.
Oh yeah, so it's a rule that's not known as often because a lot of players honestly don't use it.
Yeah.
But yeah, anytime you succeed on an attack, you can choose whether it's lethal or non-lethal.
Interesting.
It doesn't matter what weapon you have.
That's an interesting thing. And I know for me, I was sort of thinking hard. Probably more than I think. Not that I thought it was more or something like that. I just thought this character might, and also I think it'd be interesting to try to find something out if I could sort of keep these guys alive for a while. But it also presented me with a situation where when I knocked one out, I thought, oh, I now have to make sure this guy doesn't get back up, and so I fortunately had rope in my Dungeoneer's fact. And as you said, I did a little weird thing. I didn't search the smaller rooms on either side. The characters sort of just...
Well, admittedly, your target was the goblins, and you saw them run
right
directly forward.
Yes, very narrow focus there. But, and I don't know if we want to skip ahead. It was interesting. There was a couple things that you had set up in there, maybe to help the players out. Like, I noticed that there was a room that had and eventually, this might be skipping a bit ahead now, that actually had a book of translation.
Goblin language for the estranged traveler.
Pretty strange travel. I guess it makes sense, perhaps, that goblins would maybe have a book like that. So that's good. That's good. Exactly. Yeah. Hey. Yeah. And as that, so I thought, well, that was very helpful for me, for somebody who's trying to communicate what I ended up actually doing. But you went through, and then the character having, and I guess, spoiler, they kind of chased them down, found them, sort of intimidated them, and sort of eventually.
And then they ran back.
Yes.
I specifically made them run. At least one of them run back and go into one of the side rooms so that you would be able to see it.
So
the side rooms were set up to show, one, that they had a food storage, meaning that this is where they were hunkering down, for sure. This wasn't just something they found and tried to get away from you from. And then the second one is to show that, yeah, these are the guys you want, because all the stuff from the village is sort of stored in this other room. And so it's like, okay, yeah, you actually are on the right track. You did find the right goblins. This is what the town has been suffering from.
That's really, and I did notice that this was just sort of like, you could really tell everything was logically set up. It made sense. It felt like a real place. Like, okay, this is a place where they had to sleep, they had to eat. It felt like this is actually there. When that's a way of storytelling in and of itself. And all this eventually leads up into what's, I guess, the sort of boss encounter with the actual boss goblin.
He was literally a goblin boss.
Yes, indeed. And this guy, he was. It was just interesting because this guy obviously was. He's in you go through there through the. You did a much better job of describing it than I did.
Yeah, so yes. It was a room that opened up that was sort of a more squared off room that in front of you was a grand stone throne that this goblin was sitting on. To the left and to the right were barrels and shelves respectively. One you could smell the scent of wine coming from. The other one was stocked with like finer foods, finer than what you found in the food storage before. And then of course directly to your left was just like a little straw padding with sort of like wool and linens placed down for bedding. And then on the throne was this larger, bigger goblin that was obviously better well off than the others.
Yes,
he had
indeed.
A shield, he had his mace.
Yes. And so that began our sort of final battle here. Tried one more time to sort of intimidate or to negotiate. I think
I think this one was more of a negotiation. You had the book out, and you were trying to be like, why are you here? Like,
yeah.
that stuff belongs to the village, and he just wasn't having anything.
No,
He's
no,
like, no,
no.
this where I live, that my stuff.
Yes. No, that's it. I know that was the case. I wanted the character to make sure that he was, I guess, checking to make, giving these guys one last chance to surrender, and before he went in there, and maybe it was a little too confident because this was actually a tough fight, more or less.
This was more of an equal one-on-one
yes.
than the other goblins. The other goblins had like 7 health. This guy had like 20.
Yeah.
So he was hardier. He had a better chance to hit you. He was a real deal.
Yeah, Neil. Yeah, that's actually higher than my character's hit points, but he was able to get by. He had to pull out the lightning in dramatic fashion, and lightning breath. This guy. Rolls were a little weird for a while there, but he was able to. And I only knocked him out. I believe. Yes,
knocked him out, tied him up, so the villagers could deal with him.
Yes, I decided I would let them take care of this guy, and then there was a sort of like post-fight sequence where I was trying to decide what to do with these other goblins, which was funny. It ended up taking a little bit where I'm like, I was I even had to I think I even talked you through this where I was like, oh, I can't just slay them now, but I don't want them to betray me.
It's like, do I want to take him to the village? And then there was the thought of, do I want them as my companions?
Yes, exactly. That was an interesting thought for me, and I thought, because I thought these could be actually kind of an interesting twist if these became my buddies, but do I really want that here if it was true? It could be a lot. There could be a lot of fun there, and so you get back there. They get back to the village. He received his reward, and also I tried to sort of say, hey, as a way of sort of leading into maybe a future mission, maybe asked him if there was any other work for a adventurer in the future, and he got some directions. Yes.
That's sort of where it ended.
And that is where it ended. It came there. It was a fun little start there. And because we were using the milestone system, he leveled up to level 2. And I believe that's where it ended. A few other questions I was thinking, just from a general point. I had a lot of fun. What are some was there some observations you had for me as a player, for you as a DM, that you thought that you learned, or that you thought, especially thinking in the minds of somebody who was just getting into D&D or tabletop gaming, that you think we should mention here?
I can't really think of any off the top of my head. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been introducing new players for a long time. So I've sort of got this method. So even though you didn't exactly sneak behind them, I kind of guessed that you would do something to follow them.
Mm-hmm.
When you confronted them, I'm like, well, you can't see the rest of the adventure if you don't find the cave, if they don't lead you to it. So I had to have them run. So regardless of what you did there, I was gonna have to have you run.
So it does sound like if you're DMing or GMing, you would have to. There's obviously a lot of preparation and planning, but perhaps a bit of improvisation that has to come into this.
Oh, yeah. So there's a saying that will serve every GM well, and that's that no plan ever survives the field of battle.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much you plan. It's why I only plan for a couple hours of gameplay.
Yeah.
Really, just as far as straight gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
All the rest is built by the players, because there was one time where I had a stack, a whole story, what was going to happen, where we were going to go, and this is what I was talking about earlier, where the player just ended up derailing it because they thought something was way more important. I just had to throw it away.
Yeah.
That campaign wasn't happening anymore.
That's amazing. And that
Hundreds of hours of work.
and that
God.
I'm sure that can be disappointing at times, but I'm sure it's also kind of rewarding to see players take the story in directions you didn't expect.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's always like, well, crap. But all right. Let's see where this goes.
Yes.
But,
And that,
yeah, so that's one thing I'll say is you do want to prepare, but only prepare for your next session. And make sure you keep notes about what's happened up to that point so that as you're preparing, you don't overstep something that might have happened before. You want continuity, but you don't want to prepare so far ahead that you put in work that's never going to be used. Because it's going to happen. It will. Players love to destroy your plot for their plot. It's okay. Let it happen.
that's fair. I think that's a good session point to make. Now, I guess I should mention, what are some, like, I think we mentioned this in other videos, but just again, for somebody who's interested, whether it's Dungeons & Dragons or tabletop role-playing in general, what are some good, specifically online resources that a person should check out?
So for D&D Beyond.
Right.
For other role-playing systems, you're going to want to look for what's called SRDs. And they're just basically huge cataloged information centers for whatever you I always advocate, of course, support the role-playing system you want to play. You know, either buy a physical or buy a PDF on, like, drive-through-rpg.com or things like that. So always support. But if you can't and you just need the information, or maybe there's something that the players have that you just don't have information about, SRDs.
Okay.
You just Google whatever system you want, space SRD, and it should bring up the SRD for that system. And it'll have all the information you could ever want.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Brian. And again, sorry we lost the previous session, but I think going through it was a fun time, and it was actually fun to sort of like go back and go over it because I'd actually forgotten a few things here, and it was actually cool to learn about a couple of things that I missed actually. So that was actually really nice. Thanks again.
Speaking of, before you go, the one thing that I was talking about that you missed.
Let's see.
Here, there's a little squiggly S.
Ah.
That was a hidden door.
Oh yeah.
That if you had discovered it, you would have found a hallway with a corpse, a skeleton of a dwarf in it.
Oh.
That would have had an insignia determining him as one of the old dwarven kings.
Interesting.
And that at one point just vanished and was never heard of again. And you would have been able to determine through sort of the clues in that room that this was actually like a hideaway, a place where in times of war when they needed to get the king out, he would secret away to this specific spot.
Ooh, wow.
And so yeah, this was like a sort of, that's why you couldn't see the entrance if you were looking just on, is because it was designed that way. It was made so that people wouldn't be able to find it.
That's interesting. And like I said, I vaguely remember like doing a like roll check, and then you kind of indicating that I know. I think
have you do it. It was a harder roll check.
Yeah.
So, and you unfortunately did not make it.
I kind of sensed that I kind of sensed that I missed it there, but it was okay. We go on there, and like I said, the fact that you don't always get those things makes that just more interesting.
It's just a little mystery in the world. It didn't affect the game in any way.
No.
You still were able to have your adventure just as you would have, regardless of information. Just a little extra tidbit, something. Flavor the world a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little flavor.
And that's a really cool thing to enter. Okay. Well, I think we're just about time for us to wrap things up here. Again, thanks so much, Brian, for coming and talking with us again. Maybe we'll do some more tabletop or D&D session videos in the future. But for now, hope you found this enjoyable and maybe learned a few things for those who are interested. Take care. And I should probably mention, there are some, if you go to the Rogers Public Library website, there are some through Overdrive and through our main collection, there are some, whether they're Dungeons & Dragons or fantasy novels. There are some player handbooks that you can check out, and general information online as well. So the library is a resource for finding out more stuff about this. Thank you guys. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.